At 3 in the morning, my phone lit up with the kind of message that redraws the shape of your life before you are even fully awake. The room was dark, the kind of deep winter dark that pressed against the windows. And for a few seconds, I could not tell if the sharp feeling in my chest came from the cold air or from the glow of the screen. I remember thinking that nothing good ever arrives at 3 in the morning. I was right. It was a text from my dad. I saw his name before I saw the words, and something in me went still, the way an animal goes silent before it bolts. The message was longer than anything he had sent in months. He mentioned the house. He mentioned the exact figure I had put into it, $342,000, written out plainly as if accuracy somehow softened the blow. Then he said it was probably best if I did not come for New Year this year. The phrasing was careful and padded with politeness, the way someone might wrap glass in towels before dropping it off a balcony. He wrote that Margot was still adjusting, that the house needed a peaceful atmosphere, that he was sure I could understand. That was the moment I felt something inside me tilt. Not violently, more like a slow shifting of weight, the kind that tells you a structure you trusted is no longer sound. I did not shoot upright in bed. I did not whisper, "What?" or "How could you?" I simply let the silence in the room stretch out long enough for the meaning to sink in. Unwelcome. Not said directly, but present in every carefully chosen word. I stared at the ceiling for a while, trying to decide if this was real. There is a numbness that comes with certain kinds of betrayal. Your brain tries to mask it the way the body dulls pain before shock sets in. Even half asleep, I understood exactly what the message meant. I was being asked to step out of the picture. Cleanly, quietly, permanently, if they got their way. Before I go any further, let me pause for a moment. I always like knowing what people are doing when they listen to stories like this. It makes the world feel a little less scattered, a little more connected. So if you feel comfortable, share it later in the comments. When all of this happened, I was lying in my bed in Dublin, Ohio, staring at a faint crack in the paint above my head, trying to understand how a single text could make a familiar home feel foreign in an instant. I read the message again, slowly this time. It was amazing how many things could be unsaid inside a paragraph. He did not mention that this was our first New Year without my mom. He did not acknowledge that the house had been her dream, her project, her way of believing we still had a future after the diagnosis. He did not mention the nights I spent sorting bills and hospice paperwork while he wandered the hallway in shock. He only mentioned the number, the atmosphere, and Margot. I had always prided myself on being logical, steady, someone who did not need to raise her voice to make her point. That steadiness had carried me through my mom's illness. It helped me manage appointments, medications, the 1,000 tasks that come with becoming the adult in the room before you expected to be. After she died at 22, that steadiness became something else. A crutch. A shield. A way to survive the silence she left behind. I had not noticed how much of myself I gave away in the process until my dad started carving out a new life that did not require my presence. Margot had arrived quietly, showing up with casseroles, soft sweaters, and an expertly practiced sympathy that felt almost too smooth to be real. She called me sweetie the first day we met. My shoulders tensed without my permission. Over time, she settled in deeper. She filled drawers. She rearranged the living room. She started answering questions meant for me, little things that seemed harmless in the moment, but gathered weight like wet leaves. The house, the one I had paid for, began to feel like a place I visited, rather than a place I belonged. I brushed off the feeling, telling myself grief makes everyone behave strangely. I did not want to judge my dad for trying to build something new. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted us all to heal. I just never imagined healing would come at the cost of erasing me. The night he sent the message, I pictured him asleep in the master bedroom down the hall. I imagined Margot turning over beside him, her hair perfectly smoothed out across the pillow. I wondered if she knew he had written it, if she had suggested it, or if this was something he decided on his own because he thought it would make his life easier. Convenience has a way of disguising itself as compromise. My phone screen dimmed after a minute, waiting for me to answer. I knew that whatever I said next would be something I remembered years later. The truth is, I did not want to beg for a place at a table I had helped build. I did not want to argue my right to show up on a holiday my mom used to love. I did not want to justify the money or the labor or the countless ways I had held the family together when it would have fallen apart. So I typed one word. All right. That was it. No questions, no punctuation. I pressed send and placed the phone face down, as if turning it over made the message less visible. The silence afterward was thick, the kind that settles over you when a truth reveals itself too suddenly. I felt a calm wash through me, a strange, measured calm that did not match the situation at all. My hands were steady. My breath was even. I remember thinking I should feel something bigger, something sharper, but instead everything inside me became still. That stillness was not peace. It was the beginning of something else entirely. My mom used to say that endings rarely look like endings when they first appear. More often, they slip into the room quietly and sit down beside you, waiting for you to notice. Lying there in the dark, I understood exactly what she meant. The life I thought I had been holding together was already gone. I had been too loyal, too hopeful, too tired to see it. 3 a.m. is a strange time to face the truth. The world is quiet. There is no one to call for reassurance, no distractions to drown out the ache, just you and the sound of your own breath. That night, for the first time, I let myself admit what I had been avoiding. My dad had chosen a version of his life that did not include me. Not fully, not comfortably. And now he was asking me to make it official. I thought about the holidays growing up. My mom would play old vinyl records in the kitchen, and my dad would pretend to hate the noise while secretly humming along. She used to make these small chocolate cookies, dusted with powdered sugar, that got everywhere. One year she joked that the cookies looked like little explosions. She said life was always going to make a mess, and the trick was learning which messes were worth cleaning up. This one was not. Not anymore. I rolled onto my side, pulling the blanket up to my chin. The house creaked in that familiar way it did when the furnace kicked off. I thought about the deed with my name on it. I thought about the work I did every day, analyzing routing failures and cost leakage, knowing exactly when a system was collapsing because the numbers stopped lining up. That night, the numbers of my life finally made sense. The investment and the return did not balance. Loyalty had become a deficit. Love had become a liability. And being told not to come home had clarified something I had been ignoring for months. I did not know what I would do next. I did not know how long it would take or how much it would change. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Once a person shows you where they believe you belong, you either stay there forever or you choose to step out. Quietly, intentionally, completely. That word I sent earlier, the simple all right, was not in agreement. It was an acknowledgement. A door had closed, and I was finally ready to walk toward the one thing I had avoided the longest, the truth about what happens when a family decides you are optional. I closed my eyes and let the darkness settle around me, knowing that nothing about the coming days would be simple. The trail has a way of rewriting your story, whether you want it to or not. But sometimes the rewrite is the only honest version. I did not know it then, but the moment I placed that phone face down was the moment everything started to shift. What came next was set in motion long before dawn arrived. And once it started moving, there was no slowing it down. I woke the next morning with that same quiet certainty in my chest, the kind that settles before you even open your eyes. The house felt colder than usual, though the thermostat was set exactly where it always sat. For a moment I lay still and listened to the familiar hum of the air moving through the vents, the soft rattle of a loose register cover in the hallway, and the faint sound of a car starting somewhere outside. Life moves on, even when your heart feels caught between beats. I sat up slowly, letting the weight of the night return. Not as shock this time, but as recognition. Something had ended in the dark, and morning light only made the edges sharper. I moved through the kitchen making coffee without thinking. The smell of it brought back a memory I had not asked for. My mom, standing by the way, counter in her robe, hair messy, laughing at something I had said that was not funny at all. That was early 2022, a time when the worst of her illness had not yet shown itself. We had believed we still had time. Hope does strange things to memory. It colors everything a little softer, a little kinder, a little less true. By late spring, the doctor visits had become routine. I had a folder thick with printouts and pill schedules, half of it unreadable medical jargon, the other half instructions I followed like they were gospel. My dad floated through those months in a daze, present but unfocused, his grief building long before he knew its name. I learned to steady him the way a nurse steadies a patient, gently but firmly, reminding him of the small tasks that kept us tethered to normal life. Bills, appointments, meals, sleep. Looking back, it feels impossible that all of that happened inside 1 year. My mom declined quickly. Some days she seemed like herself, clear-eyed and sharp-tongued, ready to fight for another chance. Other days she was quieter, watching me with an expression that was both grateful and unbearably sad. I knew what she was trying to say long before she found the words. She told me once, in the softest voice, that she needed me to take care of things when she could not anymore. At the time, I promised her I would. I had no idea how much that promise would take from me. After she died in the fall of 2022, the house grew heavier. Grief does not arrive all at once. It settles in layers, finding new places to anchor every day. I kept myself busy with the necessary tasks: death certificates, financial transfers, hospice closure documents, insurance calls that pressed me for details I could barely pronounce. I was the point of contact for everything, because someone had to be. My dad spent most days sitting at the dining table, staring at the backyard like he was waiting for my mom to walk out and scolding him for tracking leaves inside. I tried not to resent his silence. He had lost the woman he had been married to for decades. I had lost the person who understood me better than anyone else on earth. Two different griefs living in the same house can feel like a fault line. For a while, we held each other steady. By winter, the rhythms of the house had settled into something almost manageable. I cooked simple meals. I drove my dad to appointments. We watched mindless television shows in the evenings, letting the noise fill the emptiness my mom left behind. Some nights I cried after he went to bed, muffling the sound in a pillow so he would not hear. I never wanted him to think he had to take care of me. I believed he needed space to put himself back together. I did not realize he was building a life that would not make room for me when he did. Margot appeared just before spring. My dad introduced her casually, as if mentioning a new book he had picked up. She was from a nearby neighborhood in Dublin, Ohio, a woman with warm sweaters and soft hands, someone who had mastered the gentle voice people use when they want to be perceived as kind. She brought over baked goods the first few times she visited: banana bread, oatmeal cookies, things my mom used to make, but not quite the same. I thanked her each time, even when something in my chest pulled tight. She walked through the house with a curious gaze, looking at framed photos, running her fingers along the back of the couch, complimenting the layout. I remember wondering if she knew I had bought the house. My dad did not mention it that day. At first, I tried to welcome her. I believed my dad needed companionship, warmth, and someone to sit with him in the quiet hours. She seemed gentle enough, polite enough, thoughtful enough. She asked about my work, though her eyes drifted when I answered. She complimented the yard, though she had not stepped foot in it. She told me I reminded her of someone she used to know, though she never said who. Small talk has a way of revealing more than people intend. I could not name what felt off, not then. It was something subtle in the way she placed her hand on my dad's arm when she laughed. Something about the way she spoke for him when someone else asked a question. Something about the way she looked at the house like she was mentally rearranging it. Little things, always little things. But little things gather weight over time. In the months that followed, the house shifted. Not physically at first, emotionally. The silence after dinner changed in tone. The way my dad reacted when I offered help changed slightly. A soft distancing that felt like a draft seeping in beneath a door. Then the physical changes began. A new throw blanket appeared on the couch, new towels in the bathroom, a scented candle on the kitchen island that was far too sweet for my taste, and nothing like the soft citrus scents my mom had preferred. These are small details, I know, but grief heightens your sensitivity to change, especially when it touches the spaces someone you loved once held sacred. Conversations about the house increasingly revolved around Margot's preferences. My dad started saying things like, "She thinks this rug might look better in the den," or "She said this table is a little too big for the room." I listened. I nodded. I tried to stay neutral. The house was meant to be shared. I wanted to be fair, but each change felt like a quiet erasing. One evening, I came home from work and found the framed photo of my mom and me, moved from the hallway shelf to a drawer in the guest room. My dad insisted he had been cleaning. Margot said she only meant to dust. I did not argue. I just placed the frame back where it belonged after they went to bed. That was also around the time my dad stopped asking if I would join him for dinner when Margot was over. Instead, he would tell me they were eating out or would be home late. I started preparing my own meals. Simple things I could eat quickly. I spent more time alone in my room, the one place in the house that still looked untouched by other people's preferences. The slow drift continued through summer. One afternoon, I overheard Margot telling a friend on the phone that the house felt like a second chance is supposed to be built on shared history, not on the bones of someone else's sacrifices. Still, I kept giving both of them the benefit of the doubt. My dad laughed more around her. He seemed lighter. I wanted that for him, truly, so I adapted. I stepped back from decorating decisions. I gave them privacy. I kept my schedule flexible. I told myself this was what a good daughter did. Be steady, be understanding, hold things together. What I did not see was how easily steadiness could be mistaken for invisibility. Small moments kept adding up. A missed invitation, a changed plan, a conversation that did not include me even when I was standing 3 feet away. The house I had anchored us in felt less like home and more like a place where I was tolerated. I ignored my instincts. I told myself, grief takes strange shapes. I told myself, families bend and stretch unevenly. But by the end of that first year without my mom, I had already begun to feel the early pull of what would eventually throw me out entirely. The signs were there, quiet, steady, gathering like storm clouds long before the rain began. And still, I stayed. I did not yet understand that love, once taken for granted, begins to feel a lot like loneliness. I stayed anyway, partly out of loyalty, partly out of habit, and partly because grief convinces you that losing anything more might break you. But the house had already begun to shift around me in ways I could no longer explain away. Even now, when I think back to that year, what surprises me most is not how quickly everything changed, but how quietly. The house on Thatcher Drive had felt solid the day we signed the papers in late 2021. I remember walking into the title office with a folder under my arm, the kind that holds far too many documents you pretend to understand. The escrow officer, a polite woman with gold-rimmed glasses, talked me through everything line by line, while my dad sat beside me with a distant look, as if the whole process existed several feet away from him. When she handed me the deed, she looked at me, not him, and said it was wise to keep the title in my name. Her voice was gentle but firm in that way professionals get when they want you to hear something, even if you are not ready for it. I nodded without asking why. I believed in security and clarity, and at the time, that felt like enough. My mom had hugged me that night in the kitchen, her hair still damp from a shower. She told me she was proud of me. She said something I did not think about again until much later. Always protect yourself, sweetheart. Not everything needs to be shared just because you love someone. I smiled and brushed it off as motherly advice. I did not know then that she was planting a seed I would one day thank her for. After she died, the house became both sanctuary and weight. I tried to keep it exactly as she loved. The soft grays on the walls, the framed photographs lining the hallway, the white curtain she insisted made the house feel like morning, even on bad days. But slowly, quietly, those touches began to fade under the presence of someone new. At first, the changes were subtle. A vase moved, a new throw pillow on the couch, a stack of magazines on the coffee table that were not mine or my dad's. Margot had a way of entering a room and rearranging its energy without touching anything. She spoke softly, but with certainty, like someone hosting guests in a home she did not own, but fully intended to. I noticed the small shifts in my room first. A laundry basket moved from its usual spot, a folded blanket placed at the foot of my bed. It was nothing offensive, nothing worth mentioning, nothing you could point to and say, this is where the shift began. That was the problem. None of it was big enough to confront, but together they built an unease that settled under my skin. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Margot standing at the sink, humming softly as she washed a mug. It was my mom's mug, the one with the bluebirds on it. She glanced at me with a warm smile and thanked me for letting her borrow it. I felt something inside me tighten, but I pushed it down. It was a mug, I told myself. just a mug. But grief attaches meaning to objects in ways that make them feel like lifelines. Around that same time, my dad and Margot began discussing home improvements. Not with me, but near me, as if I were a passerby in the middle of a conversation I was never intended to join. They spoke about paint colors and rugs and the possibility of replacing the old dining table. I listened quietly, waiting for an invitation to join in. It never came. One evening, as I passed through the living room, I heard my dad saying that the front room felt a little cluttered. Margot responded with a soft laugh and said she had a few ideas to open up the space. Neither of them looked in my direction. I stood there for a moment, unnoticed, before slipping into the kitchen. The erasing of my presence was never dramatic. It was slow, steady, procedural, the way a coastline erodes without anyone noticing until an entire section has disappeared. My room became the only place in the house untouched by someone else's preferences. Even that refuge began to change. One afternoon, I opened my closet and found a stack of old boxes pushed against the back wall. My dad explained later that he had moved some things from the garage to make room for Margot's storage containers. He said it casually, almost apologetically, but not enough to suggest he had considered how it might make me feel. The implication was simple. My room was now extra space, a storage option, not someone's living quarters, not mine. I tried to shake it off. People reorganize. Households shift. I had been telling myself versions of that sentence for months without realizing how deeply it had worn grooves into my thinking. The real shift happened in late fall. I had come home from work and found the dining room filled with catalogs. Furniture catalogs, curtain samples, and color swatches spread across the table, like a quiet declaration. Margot was standing near the window holding a stack of fabric squares against the sunlight. She waved me over with a cheerful gesture, asking what I thought of the warm taupes and earthy greens. Before I could answer, she turned to my dad and pointed out which colors would bring harmony to the space. I cannot describe why that moment hit me harder than the others. Maybe it was the way she moved with confidence through a place built on my labor. Maybe it was the way my dad looked at her, grateful for someone taking charge. Maybe it was simply the stark realization that this house, the one I had anchored us in, was being reimagined without me. The planning for New Year that year made everything clearer. My mom loved that holiday. She said new beginnings were only meaningful when shared with the people who saw you at your worst and still wanted to be near you. So when I heard my dad and Margot talking about the holiday plans one evening, I assumed naturally that I would be included. I heard the clink of dishes and soft chatter from the kitchen and made my way in. They were discussing guest lists and meal ideas. My dad said something about keeping it small. Margot nodded thoughtfully and suggested a quiet evening at home. Neither of them looked up when I entered the room. I waited for a moment, expecting someone to ask if I had thoughts, or if I wanted to help plan, or even if I intended to join them. But the conversation continued without me, wrapping around me like I was invisible. I excused myself quietly and went upstairs. Later that night, I found a note on the counter, written in Margot's handwriting. She had listed items for the New Year dinner shopping trip and placed a check mark next to each one she would handle. My name was not on the list. Not under appetizers, not under drinks, not under anything. It was like I had been removed from a role I did not know I was auditioning for. I told myself not to be dramatic. People change their holiday traditions. Couples create their own rhythms. Maybe they assumed I would have plans of my own, but deep down I recognized what I had been sensing for months. My place in this house was shrinking. Not overtly, not cruelly, just quietly, through a series of omissions. There was a moment one evening when I caught my dad looking at the living room with a faint smile. Margot had rearranged the furniture the day before. The couch had been moved to face the window. The rug was replaced with a softer one in muted colors. The coffee table had a new centerpiece, something rustic and neutral. He said the room felt more balanced now. I nodded, though I felt something inside me sag. Balance is not what I felt. What I felt was absence. The absence of my mom's tastes, the absence of my input, the absence of any sign that I lived there at all. I started spending more time outside the house, long walks through the neighborhood, late evenings at the office, coffee shop visits where I sat with my laptop open and pretended to work while letting my mind drift. The house no longer felt like a place to rest. It felt like a place where I was gradually disappearing, one rearranged room at a time. There was no confrontation, no argument, No event dramatic enough to name. Just the slow realization that the home I had built for all of us was being reshaped around someone who had entered our lives less than a year earlier. And as winter approached, the signs of that shift gathered steadily, like snow piling on a rooftop, quiet and unbroken, until the weight became impossible to ignore. This was the backdrop to the weeks leading up to New Year. The quiet drift, the subtle redirections, the shrinking space around me, and all of it moved with such precision that by the time the holiday approached, I barely recognized the place I had once believed would hold us together. And by the time New Year drew close, the distance inside that house felt like something you could measure with a ruler. The air had a different weight to it. Or maybe I had finally grown tired of pretending I could not feel it. Either way, a few days before the holiday, my dad asked if we could talk. His voice floated down the hallway while I was putting laundry away, polite in that overly careful way people use when they already know the answer. They want from you. I found him in the living room, sitting at the edge of the newly rearranged couch, his hands clasped between his knees. Margot was nowhere in sight, though her presence lingered in every detail of the room. Softer lighting, neutral colors, a scented candle still glowing. My dad looked up at me with that same familiar mixture of hesitation and hope. A look I had seen countless times throughout my life, usually when he needed something he did not want to name. He patted the cushion next to him. I sat, leaving a few inches of space between us. For a moment, he said nothing. He stared at the window, then at the rug, then at his own hands, as if waiting for the right words to appear there. He finally exhaled. I could tell he had rehearsed whatever he was about to say. I just did not know how many times. He began by talking about how difficult the last year had been. He mentioned to my mom how losing her had emptied out parts of him he did not know how to refill. His voice cracked slightly, and I felt that old instinct tug at me, the need to step in, fix things, reassure him that he was not alone. But something stopped me this time. Maybe I sensed where the conversation was heading before he even said it. Maybe the silence between each of his sentences felt too deliberate. He reached over and squeezed my hand. He told me I had been his anchor, his strength, the one who kept him steady through the worst of it. He said he did not know how he would have survived those first months without me. I waited for the pivot, because compliments from him often arrived as the softened edge of a blade. It came right on time. He said Margot had been trying her best to fit in. He said she was sensitive and easily overwhelmed around tension. He said she found holidays especially difficult, since she had her own losses, her own burdens. He said he wanted this new year to feel peaceful for her. Then he looked at me the way parents look at their children when they are about to ask for something impossibly unfair. He told me I was strong, much stronger than Margot. He said he hoped I could be understanding for just a little longer. At first, I did not respond. I felt my pulse settle into something slow and steady, as if my body wanted to observe the moment rather than react to it. He kept talking, filling the space I refused to step into. He said he did not want me to feel excluded. He said it was not about me. It never is when someone is pushing you out. He said he just wanted to avoid unnecessary stress. For everyone. I asked him what exactly he was trying to say. My voice surprised me. It came out quiet and flat, without any tremor. I sat up straighter without meaning to. He hesitated, searching for a softer phrasing than the one he had rehearsed. He finally said it. Not directly. Not even honestly, but clearly enough that I heard the truth anyway. Maybe it would be better, he said, if I took the evening to rest. He said he knew how hard the holiday would be without my mom. He said he did not want me to feel pressure to attend. He said he wanted things to feel comfortable. For everyone. There was that phrase again. For everyone. Except somehow everyone no longer included me. A quiet realization settled over me. Not sharp like a cut, but slow and deliberate. He was not asking me to stay away from my well-being. He was asking because my presence complicated the life he was building with Margot. He wanted a clean page, and I was the reminder scribbled across the top that could not be erased easily. He wanted me to choose absence, so he would not have to feel guilty for wanting it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the ground shift in a way it had not even the night my mom died. That night, I had lost someone I loved. This time, I lost the version of my dad I thought I knew. He reached for my hand again, but I pulled it back gently. I told him I did not understand why my being there would make anything difficult. He immediately disagreed, not in anger, but with that tone people use when they want to convince you not to trust your own instincts. He said I was reading too much into things. He said Margot admired me. He said she just needed space. He said I was strong enough to give it to her. There it was. The request hidden in praise. The obligation disguised as admiration. She is delicate, so she needs protection. You can take pain. She cannot. You should sacrifice for us. My mom used to warn me about guilt that dresses itself as love. I never understood what she meant until that moment. I listened to him speak for several more minutes. He circled the same sentiments again and again. He hoped I understood. He hoped I could be patient. He hoped I could see how fragile things still were. He hoped I would not take it personally. Each hope came with its own subtle pressure, its own request that I make myself smaller so his life could feel bigger. I watched his face as he spoke. There was sincerity in his eyes, but sincerity does not erase harm. He genuinely believed I should sacrifice for him. He genuinely believed I should disappear for the evening because it made things easier for someone he had known less than a year. He genuinely believed my strength meant I did not need consideration. That realization hurt far more than the words themselves. I asked him why he did not want to include me in the holiday plans. He insisted he did. Then he added another sentence that undercut the entire claim. He said Margot had been anxious about how I might feel. He said she preferred a smaller, gentler evening. He said my presence sometimes brought up memories that made things emotional for him. He said he was trying to avoid the weight of the past. My presence was the past. There it was. The truth is disguised inside comforting language. I was not being pushed out because of conflict. I was being pushed out because I carried pieces of my mom that he no longer wanted to face. I felt a calm wash through me, the same quiet calm from the night of the 3 a.m. text. It was not peace. It was an acknowledgement. Something old inside me cracked open, not painfully, but with clarity. For the first time, I saw the rift for what it really was. My dad wanted a life that did not require me. He wanted a life where his guilt did not echo. He wanted a life where his past lay quiet. And the easiest way to build that life was to make me step aside. I told him I heard him. He smiled, relieved. He thought I agreed. He did not notice the way my posture shifted, or how I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. He did not know that something in me had already begun to change. When the conversation ended, he patted my shoulder with gratitude, as if I had just done him a kindness. I nodded, though I did not say another word. I walked upstairs to my room and closed the door gently. I stood there for a long time, looking at the boxes he had pushed into my closet months earlier, the physical reminder of how easily space can be taken when you do not protect it. It struck me then that the issue was never the holiday. It was the pattern, the steady shifting of the house, the rearranged furniture, the hushed conversations, the exclusion disguised as sensitivity. And now this. A direct request wrapped in guilt, a test of whether I would step out of my own family's way. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the truth settle. A boundary had been crossed long before he asked me to sacrifice for him. I had simply been too loyal to see it. That night, as I listened to the quiet hum of the house, I realized something that had never occurred to me before. People will keep taking from you as long as you make it easy. They will let you shoulder the weight if it allows them to walk lighter. And sometimes the people you love most will teach you the hardest lesson, that loving them cannot come at the cost of losing yourself. I lay back, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling again, knowing something irreversible had begun. The days leading to New Year were coming quickly. So was a decision I had not planned to make. A decision I had not planned to make, but one that had already begun forming the night he asked me to sacrifice for him. I felt it settle deeper the next morning as I moved through the house in silence. The rooms looked the same, but they no longer felt like mine. That awareness sat heavy on my shoulders while I got ready for work. The kind of heaviness that does not announce itself with panic, but with a dull, steady certainty. Something was shifting, and this time I was not going to run behind it trying to keep everything together. I left the house early that day, before the sun had fully climbed over the roofs in our neighborhood. The air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up with its honesty. I drove to the office in near silence, the radio turned off, my mind replaying the conversation with my dad over and over, until each word felt smoothed down from repetition. It no longer hurt in the way it had hurt the night before. It simply confirmed what I already knew. I no longer had a place in the family he was choosing to build. Work should have distracted me. It often did. I spent the morning answering emails, reviewing vendor reports, and analyzing a routing issue that threatened to delay a shipment from Cleveland. I moved through tasks with practiced efficiency, but my mind kept drifting. The memory of him sitting forward on the couch, hands clasped, asking me to step aside in the softest possible voice. The thought circled me no matter how I tried to outrun it. My phone buzzed mid-morning. I ignored it. I assumed it was a spam call or a client trying to confirm a delivery schedule. When it buzzed again, then again, I finally flipped it over. 5 missed calls, all from my dad. My chest tightened, but not with panic. With recognition. I set the phone down and kept working. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again, then again. By noon, I had 15 missed calls sitting on my screen, along with 2 voicemails and a string of text messages. I refused to open any of them. Around mid-afternoon, my phone vibrated so continuously that my coworkers glanced over at me with raised eyebrows. I excused myself to the hallway. The phone kept lighting up. I saw Margot's name appear for the first time. Then a number I did not recognize. Then another. My dad again. When I counted, the total had risen to 32 missed calls. I turned the phone off. That might sound cold, but it was the warmest kindness I could offer myself at that moment. For the first time in years, I did not leap into caretaking mode. I did not call back to soothe him. I did not step into the role of emotional firefighter, trying to put out flames I did not light. I simply let the phone sit in my bag like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. I finished my workday in silence. When 5 o'clock came, I drove to a grocery store near my office and wandered the aisles without purpose, letting the normalcy of it calm my mind. I bought soup, bread, and a small container of strawberries I knew I would not eat, but placed in my cart anyway. Sometimes your body craves small gestures of care, even when your heart is busy, unraveling. When I got home, the driveway was empty. My dad and Margot were likely out, maybe at dinner, maybe visiting friends. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. I placed the groceries on the counter and stood there for a moment, listening. It struck me that the silence felt different now. Not hostile, just indifferent. A house reflects the emotional temperature of the people who inhabit it, and I had stopped contributing to the warmth long before that day. After dinner, I sat on my bed with the lamp turned low and turned my phone back on. It lit up instantly with a flood of alerts. Dozens of missed calls, several voicemails, a cascade of text messages that loaded slowly because there were too many for the phone to process at once. 62 missed calls. I stared at the number, almost impressed. When someone wants something from you badly enough, their persistence becomes a form of confession. It reveals their intentions more clearly than any sentence ever could. The text messages came in clusters. At first they were polite, even gentle. He asked if we could talk. He said he hoped I was all right. He said he wanted to clear up any misunderstandings. Then the tone shifted. He said he did not understand why I was being distant. He said he felt hurt. He said he did not know what he had done wrong. Then came the guilt. He said families go through hard moments. He said I should not make things more difficult than they already were. He said Margot felt terrible, that she was crying, that she never meant to hurt me. He said he needed me, that I was the only one he could depend on. His messages flipped back and forth between kind and cutting, steady and frantic, familiar and foreign. Then one message hit harder than the others. "You are tearing this family apart." I read it several times, letting each word sit in my chest before moving on to the next. Not because it was true, but because it was a line he had used only once before, years earlier, when my mom had wanted him to attend counseling and he had refused. The pattern revealed itself in that moment, sharp and undeniable. When faced with discomfort, he turned the blame outward. First to her, now to me. The voicemails were worse. His voice slid between pleading and scolding, the way someone might alternate between offering a hand and slamming a door. One voicemail began with silence, just his breathing on the other end. Then he whispered that he did not know why I was acting this way. He said he thought we were rebuilding. He said Margot was devastated. He said it was unfair for me to punish them for things that were not their fault. Another voicemail was less controlled. He asked why I was being stubborn. He asked why I was pushing back. He said he could not handle this right now. He said he had lost too much already. He said I should be grateful we still had each other. He said I should remember who had been there for me. I nearly laughed at that last part, a short, sharp sound that escaped before I could swallow it. Trauma has a way of sharpening irony. The final voicemail was the one that settled the matter. His voice cracked, not with grief but with frustration. He said if I loved him, I would not act like this. He said families make sacrifices. He said I needed to calm down. He said I needed to stop making everything harder. Then the sentence he must have known would land like a blow. You are breaking this family apart. It was almost identical to the text. Not an accident then. A belief. I put the phone down on my comforter and stared at the wall. Something shifted inside me. A small but powerful click, like the final piece of a lock sliding into place. I realized why the messages did not hurt the way they might have once. They were familiar. The tone, the manipulation, the rewriting of events, the framing of himself as the one wounded. I had mistaken his guilt for love for far too long. I stood and walked across the room, pulling open the window just enough to let in the cold winter air. The chill grounded me. I breathed it in deeply. The house behind me felt distant, like a place I had already begun leaving, even with my feet firmly planted inside its walls. I sat back on the bed and let the phone vibrate beside me again. Another call, then another. I watched the screen light up. I did not answer, not because I was cruel, not because I wanted to punish him, but because this was the first moment in my life when I understood that stepping back from someone who is hurting you is not abandonment. It is protection. And sometimes protection means silence. The phone buzzed again. I reached over and flipped it onto its face. The vibration rattled against the wood of the nightstand. It kept going. I let it. I finally typed one message. Just one. Sorry. I am not welcome anyway. Then I set the phone down and let the silence answer everything else. Outside, a car passed by slowly, headlights sweeping across my ceiling. The glow faded. The room settled into darkness again. I lay down and closed my eyes, letting the sound of the phone fade into the background like distant thunder. 62 calls. More messages are still coming. A choice forming quietly inside me. For the first time in my life, I did not respond, and the silence felt like the beginning of something I had needed for a very long time. The silence felt like the beginning of something I had needed for a very long time. And the next morning, that feeling only deepened. I woke before the alarm, the room dim and quiet. The phone still face down on the nightstand like a small, restless animal waiting to spring back to life. I did not touch it. I let it rest. Or maybe I let myself rest from it. I moved through my morning routine with an unusual steadiness. No shaking hands, no tightness in my chest, no urge to check whether my dad had called again. Something in me had shifted overnight, and the shift was not dramatic. It was clean, precise. A line drawn in chalk that suddenly felt carved in stone. By the time I pulled into the parking lot at work, I knew what I needed to do, not emotionally. Emotionally, I wanted to curl inward and sleep for a month. But practically, logically, structurally, I needed information, facts, boundaries, law, not guilt, truth, not emotion. I needed someone who understood the weight of paperwork better than the weight of obligation. I needed a lawyer. I sat in my car for a few seconds after turning off the engine. The air was cold, but the sunlight glinted off the hood of a nearby sedan in a way that felt almost encouraging. I scrolled through my contacts until I reached a name I had saved months earlier, long before any of this began. Thomas Riley. He had handled the closing paperwork when I bought the house. My mom liked him. She said he had kind eyes and a direct manner, 2 traits she believed were essential in anyone handling big life transitions. I called his office. The receptionist spoke kindly when I explained that I needed to schedule a consultation about a property matter. She said he was available that afternoon if I could come in. I told her I would be there. Work passed slowly. I answered emails, took calls, solved logistical problems, all while a quiet hum sat underneath every task, the steady internal awareness that something irreversible had started moving. When noon arrived, I drove to a small deli a few blocks away and ordered lunch, though I barely touched it. I kept thinking about the house, about the deed in my name, about the money I had poured into it, not as an investment, but as a foundation for a family I thought would last. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I arrived at Riley and Marsh Law on High Street. The building was unremarkable from the outside, a square structure of tan brick with a dark green awning. But stepping inside felt different. Quiet. Professional. Neutral. A place where facts mattered more than feelings. Thomas greeted me in the lobby. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe I had simply forgotten how gently time rests on people who care. Responsibility? Well. He extended his hand with that same calm confidence I remembered. We walked to his office, a modest room lined with bookshelves and framed certificates. He gestured for me to sit. I did. He sat across from me with a legal pad and a pen already in hand. He asked how I had been. I answered truthfully. Functional. Tired. A little lost. He nodded as if he had heard similar things many times. He asked what brought me in. I inhaled slowly, preparing myself, and told him everything. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just plainly, the way someone reports a structural failure in a building. Something cracked. Something shifted. Something no longer held. I told him about the house. The purchase is 2021, the escrow, the title in my name, the money I had paid. I told him about my mom's death and the months that followed. I told him about Margot moving in. I told him about the 3 a.m. message. Then I told him about the 62 missed calls. He did not interrupt. He took notes. His expression remained thoughtful, but not pitiful. When I finished, he set down his pen and leaned back slightly in his chair. He asked if my dad's name appeared anywhere on the deed. I told him no. He asked if I had ever signed a transfer or shared ownership document. I told him no. He asked if I had ever granted written permission for my dad or Margot to make decisions regarding the property. I told him no. He nodded slowly, then folded his hands. He told me the law was clear. The house was mine. Not figuratively, not emotionally, legally. Unequivocally. He said my dad living there did not change ownership. He said Margot's opinions or preferences had no legal standing. He said no one could force me to leave or pressure me to stay. He said I was fully within my rights to determine the future of the property. He slid the legal pad slightly closer to me. He said I had 3 main options. I could let things continue as they were. I could ask my dad to move out, or I could sell. The word sell seemed to hover in the air between us, solid. Heavy, real. I felt a faint tightening in my stomach, not fear, but recognition. Selling the house had never crossed my mind. The idea felt almost too sharp to touch, but the moment he said it, something inside me stilled. I realized I had unconsciously been moving toward that possibility for days, maybe weeks. He explained that if I chose to sell, my dad would need to vacate within a defined period specified by law, 30 days in some cases, 60 in others. He said I could choose to give him more time, but I did not have to. He said I could offer him a portion of the sale profits if I wanted, but again, I did not have to. The house was mine. The decision was mine. He emphasized that this was not an eviction. This was not punishment. This was a legal owner making a legal choice. I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot pulled free after being tight for too long. The decision was not emotional. It was structural, factual, clean. I asked him what would happen if I chose to sell immediately. He said the market was strong. A cash buyer could close quickly. I might even get offers above value. I asked how long the process could take. He said in the fastest cases, as little as 10 days. 10 days. I sat with that number. 10 days to dismantle a house that had taken years to build. 10 days to remove myself from a dynamic that had been suffocating me in silence. 10 days to let go of the version of family I had been fighting to preserve long, after it had already disappeared. He asked if I needed time to think. I shook my head. Thinking is what has trapped me. Analysis, hope, rationalization. I told him I wanted to proceed. I expected guilt to rise up, or fear, or sadness. But what moved through me instead was a strange clarity, a clean line of thought, a straight spine, a steady breath. This was not revenge. This was not retaliation. This was a restoration. I asked him what steps came next. He walked me through them. Listing the property, preparing disclosures, reviewing offers, drafting notices. All of it sounded strangely manageable, like solving a logistical puzzle rather than uprooting a life. He said once the process began, I did not need to speak to my dad directly about the legalities if I did not want to. Communication could go through him. He said emotions complicate decisions, but paperwork does not lie. The law did not care who had been hurt or who had been ignored. It cared about ownership. It cared about signatures. It cared about facts. When our meeting ended, he handed me a folder with documents to review. His handshake was firm and steady. He told me he admired my clarity. I almost laughed because clarity had never felt like something I possessed. But maybe it had simply been hiding under years of trying to keep peace in a house that no longer valued. Driving home, I expected the weight of what I had set in motion to hit me. It did not. Instead, I felt something close to relief. A quiet kind, not joyful, not triumphant, just honest. The house came into view as I turned onto Thatcher Drive. The lights were on. My dad's car was in the driveway. Margot's too. I sat in my car for a long moment before stepping out. The air was cold, sharper than it had been that morning. I breathed it in. Inside, the living room glowed with the warm lamplight Margot preferred. My dad looked up when I walked in. His expression hovered between hope and worry, as if he expected me to apologize or explain my silence. I said nothing. Not yet. I simply walked past him, up the stairs, and into my room. I placed the folder on my desk and sat there for a long moment, feeling the steady hum of the house through the floorboards. It was strange. Realizing I no longer felt woven into its structure, I felt adjacent to it, like a visitor passing through. That awareness stayed with me the rest of the night, quiet but insistent, guiding my thoughts with a clarity I had not felt in months. The next morning, I woke before my alarm again. The winter light was faint through the blinds, no more than a thin gray wash, but it was enough. I showered, dressed, and gathered the documents Thomas had given me. My movements were calm, efficient, almost detached. I had thought making a decision like this would feel dramatic or crushing. Instead, it felt like stepping into the correct room after realizing I had been walking through the wrong hallway for far too long. I drove to work with the heater on low and the radio off. Traffic was light. I moved through my morning tasks quickly. When 10 o'clock arrived, I stepped into a conference room, shut the door, and called Thomas's office. His assistant answered, warm and professional, and patched me through. Thomas picked up with his usual measured tone. I told him I was ready. He did not sound surprised. He said he would begin the listing paperwork immediately and reach out to them, escrow officer he trusted the most. He explained there were significant advantages to selling right before a holiday. Cash buyers often wanted to close quickly. Some investors preferred to finalize deals before the year ended for tax reasons. Inspections could be waived. Appraisals skipped. Holiday closings were not common, but they happened, and they happened fast. He said he already had someone in mind. A buyer known for quick, clean transactions. Someone who valued efficiency over negotiation and would not push for repairs or contingencies. Someone who had closed in less than 10 days before. He asked if I was comfortable moving forward with that kind of timeline. I surprised myself by answering yes without hesitation. After the call, I walked back to my desk with a steadiness that felt almost foreign. I worked until lunch. Then I called the escrow officer, a woman named Laura, who spoke with the calm cadence of someone who had untangled enough legal knots to know exactly what could and could not go wrong. She confirmed what Thomas had suggested. Cash buyers made everything faster. No lender meant no underwriting delays. No appraisal requirements, no long chains of approval. If both parties agreed, a holiday closing was entirely possible. She said she had handled a Christmas Eve closing once. That sale had taken 8 days. She sounded almost proud describing it. When I hung up, I exhaled slowly, letting the reality settle into place. 8 days. 10 days. even 12 days. No matter the exact number, the timeline was short. Very short. Short enough that my dad and Margot would hardly see the shift coming until it was already underway. By mid-afternoon, Thomas emailed me the draft listing documents. I reviewed them carefully, initialing where needed, signing where required. The numbers were straightforward. The terms are clear. There were no hidden corners or emotional traps. Just facts. Just decisions. By 4:30, the house was formally on the market. By 5:15, Thomas forwarded me an email. The cash buyer he had in mind had made an offer. Full price. No inspection. No appraisal. Closing in as little as 10 days. He had included proof of funds. He had included a note expressing readiness to move quickly before year-end. His offer had an expiration time stamped in bold letters. 48 hours. I stared at the email, feeling something cold and clean slide through my chest. Not excitement. Not fear. Something closer to resolve. I accepted the offer 30 minutes later. That was when everything began to move. The next morning, my dad called 6 times before 8 o'clock. I did not answer. I watched the phone light up again and again on the kitchen counter while I made coffee. His calls no longer carried the frantic guilt I had heard in the earlier messages. These rang differently. Shorter, tighter, almost clipped, as if fear had compressed itself inside the ringtone. Margot texted twice. The first message asked if we could talk. The second asked if there had been a misunderstanding. It was the first time she had reached out directly in days. I deleted the notifications without opening them. Around 10 o'clock, while reviewing a shipment schedule, my phone buzzed with an email. Laura. The preliminary closing timeline was attached. Property disclosures. Seller forms. Estimated closing costs. A projected closing date circled in red. 10 days from now. Seeing it written out made it real in a way thoughts alone could not. My fingers tightened on the edge of my desk. The image of the house flashed through my mind. My room. The quiet hallways. The kitchen where my dad and I once made breakfast on slow Sundays. The living room where my mom used to fall asleep with a blanket pulled to her chin. All of it shifted out of my hands, not because I was being pushed away, but because I was choosing to leave. At noon, my dad called again. This time he left a voicemail. His voice sounded different, thinner, less certain. He said he knew I was upset. He said he wanted to fix things. He said he was sorry if he had made me feel unwelcome. He did not acknowledge the actual message he had sent. He did not mention Margot. He simply said he missed me. His voice caught in a way that might have once broken me. But not that day. In the afternoon, Thomas called to confirm that the buyer had wired the earnest money. His voice sounded almost impressive. He said everything was moving faster than expected. He would begin drafting the official notices soon. He reminded me this was my decision and mine alone, that I could slow down at any point if I wanted, that nothing was locked until the final signatures. I told him to keep going. That evening, when I arrived home, I found my dad sitting in the living room with his hands clasped together as if he had been waiting for me. Margot sat beside him, her posture stiff, her smile tight and uncertain. The lamps were on, casting a soft glow. The television was muted. The whole room felt staged, like a scene arranged for a conversation they had rehearsed. My dad asked where I had been. His tone was softer than usual, carefully measured. He said he had been worried. He asked if we could talk. I told him I was tired, that I needed rest, that we would talk another day. His expression faltered. Margot glanced at him, then at me, unsure of where to place her hands or her smile. I went upstairs without looking back. In my room, I closed the door and leaned against it, my breath steady, my heartbeat even. The house felt different once again. Not indifferent this time, more alert, like it sensed a shift in its ownership, a shift in its future, a shift in its final chapter. The next morning brought more calls, more texts. My dad left another voicemail, his voice near whispering. He asked if something was happening with the house. He said he had noticed the mailbox had a new piece of mail from the county recorder. He asked if he should be worried. His tone trembled slightly on the last question. By afternoon, Thomas emailed me copies of the official notices he would send the next day. Required documents. Standard paperwork. Factual information. Legal truth. He asked me to confirm the forwarding address I would use for my portion of the implement. Closing funds. I read the notices twice, then a third time. Each sentence felt like a step further from the life I had been trying to repair, long after it had already broken. These documents were not emotional, they were structural. They were the blueprint for dismantling a house without blame or argument. They were the instructions for unraveling a life calmly, cleanly, and with dignity. That evening, my dad knocked on my bedroom door for the first time in months. His knock was tentative, almost unfamiliar. I did not open the door. He stood on the other side for a few seconds, then longer still. He finally walked away. I sat on the edge of my bed as the house settled around me with small creaks and soft sighs, the sounds of a structure making peace with change. That night felt like a held breath, a pause before something large shifted its weight. I did not sleep much. I watched the shadows on the ceiling move as cars passed outside, and I listened to the faint hum of the heater turning on and off. Somewhere deep inside me, something quiet but resolute was forming, taking shape with the same inevitability as dawn. The next morning arrived before I was ready, pale and cold through the blinds. I showered, dressed, and packed my laptop bag with deliberate calm. The folder from Thomas sat exactly where I had left it. I slipped it inside the bag and headed downstairs. My dad was at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee clasped between his hands. He looked up when I walked in. His expression carried the kind of hopeful stiffness that appears right before someone tries to negotiate with you. Margot sat across from him, her elbows drawn in, shoulders slightly hunched, pretending to scroll through her phone. The television played low in the background, some morning show with cheerful hosts that felt painfully out of place. No one spoke. I poured myself coffee, placed the lid on the cup, and walked out the door without saying a word. My dad called my name softly, but I did not turn back. The air outside was cold enough to sting, but it grounded me. It reminded me that I could choose movement. I could choose direction. At 9 o'clock, Thomas called to confirm that the notices had been sent. He spoke with that steady cadence I had begun to depend on, the tone of someone who understood exactly where the legal boundaries lay and was not afraid to walk them cleanly. He said the buyer had already signed the revised agreement. He said the closing packet would be ready by the end of the week. He said everything was proceeding exactly on schedule. When I hung up, I let my hand rest on the steering wheel for a few seconds. The world outside the windshield looked strangely crisp. The bare winter trees along the sidewalk held still in the windless morning, branches sharp against the pale sky. The clarity of it all echoed the clarity inside me. It became real later that afternoon, when Laura from escrow emailed the final numbers. I opened the attachment slowly, knowing that this would be the moment everything shifted from theory to fact. There it was, the sale price, the deductions, the fees, the exact figure that would be wired to me at closing. Not a dollar more than my legal share. Not a dollar less. A clean line on a clean document that represented nearly everything I had poured into the house. Years of paychecks. Years of choices. Years of trying to hold a family together with the quiet labor no one sees. Reading it did not bring joy. It brought steadiness and a strange, almost clinical kind of peace. By early evening, the house felt restless. My dad moved from room to room, pretending to look for things that had not been misplaced. He paused in the hallway outside my bedroom twice, but did not knock. Margot clattered around the kitchen louder than necessary, slamming cabinet doors, opening drawers, closing them hard. Anxiety tends to make noise even when people are trying to hide it. Around 7 o'clock, my dad finally knocked. A soft tap, hesitant, as if he feared the answer before the conversation even began. I opened the door and stepped back. He walked in with his shoulders slightly rounded and sat on the edge of my bed then, the way he used to when I was a kid having nightmares. He asked if it was true. His voice wavered on the word true, as though truth itself were something fragile that might break in his hands. He asked if the house was being sold. He asked why I had not told him. He asked how long this had been happening. The questions came too quickly, one layered on another. An avalanche of things he should have known long before this moment. I sat in my desk chair across from him. I folded my hands in my lap. I breathed once, slowly, before answering. I told him yes. The house was being sold. Yes, the paperwork had begun days ago. Yes, the decision was final. I said it calmly, not sharply, because the clarity came from a place beyond anger. Anger had burned out weeks ago. What remained was structural truth. He stared at me for a long time. His eyes flicked toward the wall, then to the floor, then finally back to mine. His face tightened, the way it always did when he was building a case in his own mind. He asked why I would do this to him. He asked if I understood what this meant. He said losing my mom had already broken him, and now I was breaking him again. He said families do not act this way. He said children do not abandon their parents. He said I owed him something. That was when his voice hardened just a little, enough to reveal the belief beneath all the guilt. He said I needed to sacrifice for him, that he had sacrificed his whole life for me, that now that my mom was gone, I was all he had, that I should make things easier, not harder, that I should understand his needs. He said he needed me to step aside for him. Something inside me went very still hearing that. Not hurt, not surprised, just still. Like when a puzzle piece finally falls into place after months of turning it in the wrong direction. I told him I loved him, but love and disappearance were not the same thing. I told him supporting him did not require erasing myself. I told him losing my mom had broken me too, and yet somehow that had never entered the conversation. I told him I had been trying for months to belong in a house where decisions were made without me, where rooms were changed without asking, where Margot quietly shifted me out of spaces that used to feel like mine. He interrupted to defend her. He said Margot had been trying. He said she was adjusting. He said she needed space. He said I needed to be more understanding. I asked him who had given me space to adjust. The question hung heavy between us. He did not answer. Margot, she asked why we were discussing the house without her. She said she deserved to know. She said she lived here too. Her voice carried a near indignation, as if my decision to sell my own property had somehow insulted her personally. My dad looked at her with a mixture of pleading and exhaustion. She looked at him, then at me, and I saw it clearly for the first time. Not malice, not cruelty, just inconvenience. I was an obstacle, a reminder of a past she had not been part of, a piece of the family puzzle she could not fit into no matter how she shifted her edges. She asked why I would sell now, during the holidays, during a time when people supposedly come together. She asked if I thought of anyone but myself. She asked if this was revenge. I told her it was not revenge. It was simply the truth made visible. I told her the house had always been mine, that my dad had always known that choosing to move forward with the sale was choosing reality over fantasy. I told her none of this was about harming her, though she had contributed more than she realized to the distance between my dad and me. Her mouth tightened into a thin line. She said something under her breath that I did not catch, but the tone told me everything. She had never seen me as part of the picture she wanted to build with him. My dad ran a hand through his hair, the way he always did when trying to reconcile two opposing realities at once. He said he did not want to move. He said this house was home. He said the memories were here. He said he had already lost too much. I told him I understood. I told him I was not asking him to pretend the loss of my mom had not gutted him, but I reminded him that the house did not belong to memories. It belonged to signatures. And all the signatures were mine. He asked if he could buy it. His voice caught on the word buy. I shook my head. His finances were not capable of something like that. He knew it. I knew it. Margot knew it too, based on the sudden shift in her expression. He stood then, slowly, as if the weight of the realization pressed on his shoulders. He walked toward the door, then paused. He looked back at me with an expression I had not seen since I was a child. Vulnerable, small, lost. He asked if I could reconsider. Not for him, for the memory of my mom. That was his final attempt. The last emotional thread he knew might catch on something inside me. He said she would not want this. He said she would want us together. He said she would want harmony. I stood too. I stepped closer to him. I spoke softly. I told him my mom had always wanted honesty, not harmony at the expense of truth. I told him she had taught me to protect myself, even from the people I loved most. I told him she had once warned me that loyalty without boundaries becomes self-destruction. His eyes flickered, as if he recognized the truth in that. Or perhaps he recognized the echo of my mom in my voice. We stood in silence. Margot shifted uncomfortably behind him. The house felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls understood that the reality they held was reaching its natural end. Finally, my dad exhaled, a long, uneven breath. He nodded once, not in agreement, but in resignation. He stepped out of the room. Margot followed him, her footsteps sharp against the hallway floor. I closed my door gently. The house would be sold. The decision was final. Not a victory, not a punishment, not revenge. Just consequence. And consequences, even the necessary ones, always leave a quiet kind of ache in their wake. He stepped out of the room. Margot followed him, her footsteps sharp against the hallway floor. I closed my door gently and rested my hand on the knob for a moment, feeling the cool metal under my palm. The house had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that folds into itself, heavy but resigned. It reminded me of the silence after a storm, not peaceful exactly, but emptied, as if the air were still deciding what remained. The days that followed moved with an odd rhythm, not fast, but inevitable. With the closing date approaching, everything seemed to shift into a practical mode. Emails exchanged, documents finalized, signatures prepared. It was all shockingly unceremonious. No arguments, no bargaining, just logistics. A house changing hands. A family rearranging itself around a truth it could no longer deny. My dad avoided me at first. Not out of anger, more out of displacement, as if he no longer knew which role he was supposed to occupy in my presence. He walked around the house with slower steps, pausing in doorways as though the rooms themselves were changing shape under his feet. I watched him once from the bottom of the stairs. He stood in the living room touching the mantel with the back of his hand, like someone trying to memorize a texture before losing access to it. Margot moved differently. She packed early. Too early. A week before the closing, I walked past the guest room and saw open boxes lined neatly in rows, half filled with sweaters folded military tight, ceramic bowls wrapped in newspaper, 2 framed photos of her and my dad at a fall festival in Columbus. Her movements were precise and brisk, almost relieved, as if she had been preparing for the exit long before the decision was officially made. When our paths crossed in the hallway, she would nod politely, but her eyes stayed guarded. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that the dynamic had shifted permanently. There would be no more gentle suggestions, no more rearranging household systems behind my back, no more quiet attempts to push me toward the margin. She had gotten what she wanted, though not in the way she had envisioned. I would be gone. The house would be gone, and she would not have to compete with the memory of who I used to be in these rooms. 3 days before closing, my dad finally knocked on my door again, a soft rap. Not a plea, not an accusation, just a tired gesture. When I opened it, he stood there with a cardboard box hugged to his chest. His expression held something I had not seen in months, maybe years. Not clarity, not regret exactly, something closer to humility. He asked if I could help him move the remaining boxes to the garage. His tone was flat. Practical, the tone of someone accepting a reality he still did not fully understand. I followed him down the hallway. The house felt smaller with each step, not physically, but emotionally, as if the spaces were folding in on themselves now that the life they had held was dissolving. We carried the boxes to the garage. The winter air seeped through the cracks. My dad set his box down on a folding table and wiped his forehead with the back of it, his hand, even though the garage was cold. He looked at the labeled boxes stacked neatly in the corner. Clothing, tools, books, miscellaneous. His handwriting on each label was tight and slanted, the same handwriting he used when writing grocery lists for my mom. He said he found an apartment near Westerville, a small place, 1 bedroom, month-to-month lease. He said it flatly, like he was reporting a weather forecast, something factual, something unavoidable. I nodded, not out of agreement, but acknowledgement. He hesitated, before adding that Margot would be moving in with him. He said she thought it was best for them to start over somewhere neutral. No history, no ghosts. His eyes flicked to me when he said ghosts, as if he wondered whether the word sounded accusatory. It did not. It sounded honest. We stood there for a few seconds in cold air. Neither of us reached for another box. Neither of us tried to fix the conversation. He finally said he wished things had gone differently. His voice cracked slightly on the word differently. He did not say whose fault it was or who should have tried harder. He simply stated the truth. Things had not gone the way he imagined, or the way he hoped, or the way he had silently depended on. I did not respond. There was nothing left to defend, and nothing left to repair. Some endings are not arguments. They are conclusions. The morning of the closing day arrived quietly. Pale sunlight through thin clouds. A chill sharp enough to wake the skin. I dressed slowly, choosing a sweater my mom had bought me years earlier. Soft navy wool. She always said the color made my eyes look calmer. I did not feel calm, but the sweater felt right. My dad and Margot were already packing the car when I came downstairs. 2 suitcases, 3 boxes, a small cooler. My dad's coat collar was turned up against the wind. Margot's hair was tucked into a thick scarf. They looked tired rather than defeated. 2 people acknowledging that a chapter had ended and the next one would not begin in the same place. We exchanged simple words. Not bitter, not sentimental, just factual. They would leave after I returned from the closing office. They would drop off their keys on the counter. They would text me once they arrived at the apartment. Practical language, free of emotional weight, as if speaking lightly might keep the truth from pressing too hard on either of us. My dad lingered a moment after Margot walked to the car. He looked at me, a long look that sifted through years of shared life, unspoken memories, buried expectations. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. Instead, he placed his hand briefly on my shoulder. The gesture was gentle, familiar, and painfully temporary. I watched them drive down the street. The car turned left and disappeared behind the row of houses. The quiet that followed was not harsh. It was clean. At the title office, Laura greeted me with professional warmth. The closing documents were neatly arranged on a polished wooden table. She explained each page with calm clarity. I initiated, signed, dated. The process took less than an hour. Years of living condensed into a stack of papers and a wire transfer form. When she slid the final document across the table, she told me the funds would reflect in my account by late afternoon. She said everything had gone smoothly. She said it was one of the cleanest closings she had handled all year. I thanked her. I meant it. Clean matters. Clean felt like dignity. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face sharply. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and rested my hands on the steering wheel. The moment felt hollow and whole at the same time. A door had closed. Another had not yet opened, and I was suspended in the kind of quiet only major life changes create. I drove back to the house one last time. The driveway was empty. The living room lights were off. The windows reflected back only the winter sky. Inside, the house felt larger than it had in months. Echoes replaced footsteps. Dust motes hung in the air, visible in the slants of afternoon sun. I walked through each room slowly. Not to grieve, not to second guess. Just to see the spaces clearly without the weight of what they used to hold. The kitchen where my mom once taught me how to slice apples safely. The hallway where my dad and I had painted the walls together the summer before she passed. The living room, where she used to nap with a blanket pulled up to her chin. In the corner of a cabinet, I found a small object I had forgotten about. A wooden measuring spoon set my mom bought at a craft fair in Cincinnati. She liked the feel of them and said they made baking more peaceful. I held the smallest spoon in my hand for a long moment. The wood was smooth and warm, shaped by her use, not mine. A piece of her soft but steady presence remained in that simple object. I slipped it into my coat pocket. Upstairs, my room felt strangely untouched, as if the past months had happened somewhere else entirely. I gathered the last of my belongings into a single canvas bag. Not much, not enough to feel like a life, but enough to start one. In the doorway, I turned back for a final look. The room did not feel sad. It felt emptied of confusion, cleansed of tension. It felt ready to belong to someone else. When I stepped outside, I locked the door behind me and placed the keys on the kitchen counter through the open window of the back door, just as instructed. The metal clicked softly on the countertop, a quiet sound that felt heavier than it should. I walked to my car slowly. No hurry, no rush, just movement. Driving away, I did not look back at the house when I reached the stop sign at the end of the book, street. I did not need to. Some endings do not require a witness. They simply require acceptance. The emptiness inside me was not painful. It was spacious. Something had been lifted, not taken. And while I did not feel triumphant, I felt something steadier, a kind of relief that sat low and warm, like a candle that had been burning quietly for years, finally extinguished on its own. Leaving without screaming had not been my intention, but it became the truth. And sometimes, silence is the most honest ending a story can have. I drove away without looking back, and for the first time in months, the road felt open. Not welcoming exactly, but honest. It led forward and nowhere else. I followed it without checking the mirrors too often, letting the quiet settle around me the way dust settles after something heavy has been moved. That heaviness is gone now. I could feel the absence of it in the way my shoulders finally dropped when I reached the highway. I stayed with a friend for a few days while I found my footing. Her guest room was small, with a sagging mattress and a lamp that flickered if you breathed too close to it. But it felt more like home than the house I had just left. The first night I slept there, I woke up only once. Not from a dream. Not from panic. Just from the strange quiet that comes after chaos. My mind did not race. My breath did not stutter. I lay there staring at the ceiling and realized I did not feel lost. I felt unfinished, but not lost. On the third morning, I found a small apartment in Worthington. 1 bedroom. A window that faced east. A kitchen too small to cook anything complicated. A carpet that had seen better days. It was available immediately. I signed the lease that afternoon, paid the first month, and bought a set of dishes from a clearance shelf in a home goods store across the center street. The first thing I unpacked was the wooden measuring spoon I had taken from the old kitchen. I placed it in a drawer next to a mismatched spatula and a rubber whisk. It looked out of place there, almost too gentle for the chipped laminate counter, but it grounded me. It reminded me of my mom, of her hands moving calmly through flour and sugar on slow Saturday mornings. She always said baking was proof that small ingredients could create something whole. I wondered if she ever realized the same could be true for people. The days leading up to New Year passed quietly. I worked, I cleaned, I bought a cheap rug for the living room. I hung a small painting above the couch. I drove to the grocery store and bought apples, just because my mom used to do that around the holidays, even when no one ate them. My phone buzzed a few times with unknown numbers. I assumed they were updates from my dad, or maybe calls he hoped I would return. I did not check the voicemail. Some closures arrive without conversation. On the morning of New Year's Eve, snow began to fall. Soft flakes. The kind that float more than they fall, drifting sideways with the wind. I made coffee in a tiny pot that sputtered every time it heated up. The apartment was cold, but a manageable cold. The kind you can fix with socks and a blanket. I stood at the window watching the snow gather on the bare branches outside. The world felt paused, as if waiting for instruction. Around noon, I received a text from my dad. It was short. He said the apartment was fine. He said he and Margot were settling in. He said he hoped I was well. That was it. No guilt. No rewriting of events. Just a handful of neutral words that sounded more like weather updates than a father talking to his daughter. I typed a response, then deleted it. Not to be cruel. To be clear, some distances need time before they can take shape honestly. I spent the afternoon cleaning the kitchen and reorganizing the single drawer that held the spoon. Toward eve, I heated soup on the stove and turned on a small lamp beside the couch. The snow kept falling. The world kept quieting. I felt myself slow down with it, breath by breath. When the clock reached 9, fireworks began popping in the distance. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and stood at the window again. Bright bursts reflected off the snow, quick and temporary. Each flash made the glass vibrate slightly under my fingers. For the first time in my life, New Year did not feel like an obligation. It did not feel like something I had to perform or pretend for. It did not feel like a night with a script I was expected to follow. It felt simple, clean. A line between one version of myself and the next. I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle deeper. My mind wandered through the past year, not to punish myself, but to see the shape of things as they really were. Losing the house felt strange, not like losing a home, but like losing a container that had outgrown its purpose. Losing the version of family I once believed in felt heavier, but not wrong. Families break in places long before the fracture becomes visible. Sometimes the break is simply a truth finally letting itself be seen. I thought about my dad, about the way grief had rearranged him, about the way responsibility had rearranged me, about how two people can love each other and still misunderstand each other so completely that they stop recognizing the shape of their bond. Love does not disappear, but it does change. And sometimes love asks you to step closer. Other times, it asks you to step away. I thought about Margot too. Not with anger, with distance. She had wanted a life that did not include the complexity of me, and he had wanted the ease of choosing that life. People reveal themselves when the cost of honesty rises. She revealed what she feared. He revealed what he needed, and I revealed what I could no longer carry. I sat there for a long time, listening to the faint crack of fireworks and the hum of the heater in the corner. My chest felt open in a way I had not expected. Not light exactly, but steady. I realized that regaining myself had cost something, but losing myself had been costing more. When midnight approached, I turned off the lamp and left the room in soft half-darkness. Outside, the fireworks grew louder, brighter, more insistent. A countdown started somewhere nearby, voices drifting through the cold air. 10, 9, 8. I closed my eyes. 7, 6, 5. I placed my hand on my chest. 4, 3, 2. I took a slow breath. 1. The year changed without ceremony. No embrace. No champagne. No family gathered around a table pretending to be whole. Just me in a quiet apartment with a wooden spoon in a drawer and a heart that finally felt like it belonged inside my own ribs again. New Year, for the first time, felt like mine. And before I end this story, I want to leave you with something true. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.